The man falsely claimed to be a pure German, but the German soldiers didn't believe him. They directly took off his pants, which seemed like a crude method, but it was the best way for Germans to identify Jews. This was due to the practice of circumcision in the Jewish faith, and anyone confirmed to be Jewish would face execution. Among the captured soldiers, Sally witnessed this scene and felt extremely frightened. He immediately took off his red scarf and buried his identification documents in the ground because he was indeed a pure Jewish person. When questioned by the German soldiers, Sally pretended to remain calm and immediately expressed his grievances in fluent German. He claimed to be a pure German who lost his parents at a young age and was imprisoned by the Soviets until he was eventually rescued. His fluent German and convincing lies made it difficult for the German soldiers to determine the truth, and they brought him before a German captain. In the face of the officer's interrogation, Sally coped freely and said his orphaned life again, but the officer did not eat this set. Asked about his parents' name, bad, just made up his mind, actually forgot to make up a name for his parents. At that moment, another officer responsible for registration came up with his own imaginative story about Sally's tragic fate. Seeing this, the lieutenant embraced Sally and comforted him, asking him not to be upset. Just then, a captured Soviet officer who couldn't communicate with the Germans sparked a dispute. Coincidentally, Sally was fluent in Russian and was called upon to serve as a translator. To everyone's surprise, the Soviet officer turned out to be Stalin's son. The German soldiers were delighted and planned to use the captive as a trophy for bragging rights. The lieutenant believed that Sally had made a significant contribution and pulled him in for a photo together. Sally's disguise was truly miraculous, as if even God was on his side. However, just as Sally was enjoying the food handed to him by the Germans, a prisoner in the crowd called out his name. This sudden action immediately caught the attention of the German soldiers. The person was Sally's archenemy from the orphanage who couldn't tolerate Sally's act of surrendering. He revealed to the Germans that Sally was a Jew. Since the Germans couldn't understand Russian, they relied on Sally to translate. In a hurry, Sally translated that the person was insulting the German soldiers. Then, he quickly walked over and slapped the person. This act infuriated the person, who tried to attack Sally, but the Germans wouldn't allow their compatriot to be bullied. The enemy's ultimate fate was undoubtedly a dead end. In this way, Sally narrowly escaped once again. In the following days, he marched with the German soldiers, trying to conceal his Jewish identity. Every time he needed to use the restroom, Sally would keep his distance because his circumcision marked him as a Jew. This symbol would bring him much trouble in his subsequent escape. Later, his comrades brought Sally to a Jewish execution site. They told him that these were the Jews who had killed his parents, the ones who had deprived them of their possessions and seized their resources. They all deserved to die, they said, and they asked Sally to kill the Jews before him to avenge his parents. To avoid exposure, Sally had no choice but to steel himself and reluctantly handle the machine gun. As night fell, he quickly burned his identity documents. At this moment, his heart was filled with mixed emotions. Sally couldn't understand why these German soldiers were so kind to him while being so cruel to the Jews. How long could he, as a Jew, continue to conceal his true identity? Shortly thereafter, they captured a Soviet position and seized an enemy radio station. As Sally was translating the contents, an unexpected accident occurred. 3 comrades were instantly shot dead by a sniper. Sally realized that he couldn't stay here and wait to die. He needed to find a way to defect to the Soviet side. Using the radio, he contacted the Soviet forces, and claimed to be a Soviet Young Communist League member who had been undercover as a Jew in the German army. They agreed to a secret code and arranged a meeting place. In the evening, Sally stealthily crawled out of the trench and swiftly crossed the battlefield. However, just as he raised his hands to surrender, the Soviet soldiers on the other side also raised their hands in surrender. This unexpected turn of events left Sally stunned, but when he turned around, he saw a large group of German soldiers rushing towards him. It turned out that the German soldiers, thinking Sally was seeking revenge for his comrades, decided to launch a lone night attack on the Soviet forces. His luck was truly extraordinary, as his defection attempt turned him into a great hero. The colonel learned about his brave deeds and adopted him as his own son. He also planned to send Sally to an elite military academy in Berlin for professional training, aiming for him to become an outstanding German officer. Sally was overjoyed, finally relieved that his true identity wouldn't be exposed. Soon, Sally was sent to the elite academy in Berlin. In front of numerous students, his superior introduced him as the hero returning from the battlefield. The honor instantly earned the admiration of everyone present. Every time he went to the restroom or took a shower, he would check if the door lock was damaged. This behavior was solely because he was a Jew infiltrating the German army. When he noticed that Germans wore underwear while showering, his anxious heart finally eased. Thus, Sally lived each day in a state of constant fear, afraid that one day his Jewish identity would be exposed. During the subsequent training, Sally excelled in every aspect, even capturing the attention of the usually aloof Lenny, who seemed to be attracted to him. However, one day, during a class on how to identify Jews, Sally became restless. To his luck, The instructor directly selected him for demonstration. The instructor took out measuring tools and conducted facial measurements on Sally. He was terrified, thinking that his true identity would surely be revealed. However, to Sally's surprise, the instructor's conclusion was that although Sally wasn't pure German nobility, he was not a Jew either. Clearly, the instructor was not competent, as Sally was a pure Jew standing right in front of him, yet he failed to recognize it. With the instructor's determination, Sally would no longer be suspected by others. With his unique charm, Sally caught Lenny's favor. One day, Lenny asked Sally out. Lenny had a lively and straightforward personality and wanted to take their relationship further. But Sally was worried about his Jewish identity being exposed, so he refused Lenny's request on the spot. Lenny thought Sally was rejecting her and became somewhat angry. Sally hurriedly explained that they were still underage and once they were older, he would fulfill her wishes. They then playfully frolicked around. When they arrived at a Jewish cemetery, they discovered that the tombstones had been dug up. Lenny took pleasure in this misfortune, cursing the Jews and claiming that they didn't deserve to have tombstones. This statement instantly enraged Sally, and he slapped Lenny in response. Hurt and angry, Lenny ran away, and thus their brief romance came to an end. After returning, Sally, in order to suppress her desires, unexpectedly tied a string around herself down there. However, new troubles quickly followed. During physical training, Sally accidentally injured herself down there, and the next day was the annual medical examination. To make matters worse, her classmates told her that the examination required full nudity. Faced with this news, it was a complete shock for Sally. At this point, Sally cleverly lied and claimed to have a toothache, crying and insisting on seeing a dentist. Although she managed to avoid the medical examination, she couldn't escape the doctor, who forcibly extracted one of her good teeth. The next day, during an assassination training session, they were faced with a dummy representing the Jewish badge. All the trainees mercilessly stabbed the dummy without hesitation, except for Sally, who hesitated and couldn't bring herself to do it. However, this action immediately raised suspicions about his identity from the instructor. Soon, Sally was called to the archives room by the instructor. Due to an investigation into his identity, it was discovered that a proof document was missing from his file. Sally had no choice but to lie and claim that his identification documents were still at the orphanage, which was now occupied by the Soviets, and he couldn't retrieve them at the moment. Listening to his cunning defense, the instructor was momentarily helpless and had no choice but to let Sally go for now. Afterwards, Sally was filled with anxiety and felt that his true identity would soon be exposed. At that moment, a fighter jet roared overhead and dropped several bombs. It appeared that the Soviet army had started bombing Berlin. After the bombing, Sally miraculously emerged unscathed, but the archives room was reduced to rubble. Watching this scene, Sally laughed happily, knowing that he no longer had to worry about his identity being revealed. However, at this time, Germany was being pushed back by the Soviet army, on the verge of collapse, and only a small portion of the German forces were still fighting desperately. Sally's Hitler Youth Squad was also forced to join the battle, but Sally didn't want to die in vain. Taking advantage of the chaos, she dropped her gun and ran towards the Soviet soldiers, raising her hands and declaring herself a member of the Soviet Young Pioneers. This saved her life. Later, he was taken to the Soviet camp, where the Soviet commander believed he was a traitor. Sally quickly explained that he was a pure-blooded Jew and offered to prove it by taking off his pants for the officer to see. However, the officer was not convinced and showed Sally photographs of the Jews being massacred. He showed Sally the gruesome fate that awaited the Jews at the hands of the German soldiers, especially being a Jew in Berlin. The officer pointed out Sally's flushed face and accused him of being a spy or a traitor. Sally wanted to continue explaining, but the officer was no longer interested in listening to his nonsense. He brought in a genuine Jew and ordered him to execute Sally. As the executioner was about to pull the trigger, someone in the crowd suddenly shouted Sally's name. Sally turned around and was surprised to see her long-lost brother. The two of them burst into tears and embraced, while Sally smiled with joy. In those tumultuous times of war, surviving was nothing short of a miracle. This is a movie based on a true story. Sally goes through multiple identity swaps, like a double agent, navigating between the Soviet Union and Germany. His escape journey is filled with miracles, but all of it is just to stay alive. I am Movie Lover, and if you enjoyed my movie review, please subscribe to me. See you in the next episode.